Adam Lerner, Brooklyn Photo Works, and today I've got my hands on a Leica SL. Now this is a camera that I've been thinking about getting my hands on for a long time. I've picked them up a few times at the Leica store, but I actually never had a chance to shoot one until just recently. You guys know from my video that I made with the Leica Q that after trying this thing out, I actually had to buy it. Now this is definitely a lower cost of entry, especially considering now with the Q2 out there, these things are what would be considered a value in the Leica world. But I do love this camera. It's a great travel camera. But as an automotive and portrait photographer, I really need a camera that has more versatility, especially for shooting with different lenses and more portrait type of stuff. That's not what this camera delivers, but the SL is what I'm talking about. Now, I will say it right here, right now, this is the best mirrorless camera I have ever shot with. In fact, it's probably one of the best cameras I've ever shot with. The Electronic Viewfinder on here is absolutely incredible. It's the best electronic viewfinder I have ever used on a camera. Hey guys, if you're looking to build a beautiful website, go to squarespace.com/Adam and you can try it out for 14 days for absolutely free. And if at any time during that 14 days or at the end of that period you want to actually buy a Squarespace website, use the code ADAM, A-D-A-M, and you will save 10% at checkout. Everything looks absolutely fantastic in there. It's huge, it's bright, the colors are amazing. In fact, my workflow with this camera was so fantastic and probably one of the best. And let me just show you how I went about using this camera. But I'll just take a little step back. First of all, you can see this is a very clean and simple design. There's very few buttons on here, and the ones that are on here are not even marked. Actually, let me just get that straightened out. Okay, so you've got these 4 buttons on the back here. You assign them to do the things that you want them to do, just like the buttons on the top. Now, they do come assigned from factory, but like most SL users, you assign them for the way that you want to work. And literally, I got the camera on a Wednesday night. I programmed the buttons how I wanted to use them, which was a lot easier than you think. I did a shoot all day Thursday and it was like an extension of me. I did not have to think about this camera. Now, one thing I should mention is that I need glasses to see things up close. So like, for example, if I'm using my phone, I need to put on these glasses. But if I'm looking, if I'm just out in the real world, or if I'm talking to my subject, I don't need my glasses. So same thing happens when I'm using a camera. If I've got the camera and I need to look and change settings on the back of the camera, or if I need to check focus, like if I'm looking at the viewfinder to review my images, I have to put on my glasses. Then I have to take my glasses off and then put the camera back to my eye. With a DSLR, this is pretty much the routine and it's a bit of a pain in the ass. However, with the SL, that was no problem because I used the electronic viewfinder for everything. In fact, I turned the LCD off, and like with any camera, particularly with a mirrorless, I have image review off, but here's how my workflow went down. I would put the camera to my face, use the electronic viewfinder to check my exposure, then, which is great because as you know with an EVF, you get to see your exposure, exactly how it's going to be before you take your picture. I would take the picture and then I would just slide my thumb onto the first button on the left here and I would be able to hit the review button and check my exposure right there in the viewfinder without ever having to take my hand off. So I would use my thumb to change my shutter speed here, use my thumb to also change focus points here with this fantastic jog dial, and then I would use my thumb to go right onto this button right here. So it was a very simple process. Bing, 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 bing. Really simple, no thinking whatsoever. And then I assigned the other buttons just how I needed them. So I had one assigned for ISO, which was fantastic. And I had the top dial here assigned to the aperture, okay? Now speaking of aperture, this camera, I think when it was originally sold, came with this lens, this 24-90 Vario-Elmarit. It is a variable aperture lens, which is something that's typically a turnoff for me. I'm not as into zooms as I am into primes. I definitely prefer primes. And a variable aperture zoom definitely didn't seem like something that I'd be into, but I can tell you this lens is incredible. It's so insanely tack sharp. Focus was perfect every time. Obviously that's a combination of the camera and this lens, but it had that Leica look with that incredible separation where you've had insanely tack sharp focus on your subject and the most beautiful background. You know, we're talking about like just gorgeous bokeh or bokeh, depending on how you guys like to pronounce it. And I know you guys are going to try to correct me and say, oh no, it's only pronounced bokeh. And then other people say it's called bokeh. Yeah, whatever, dude, okay? You know, it's the out of focus areas that look absolutely amazing. Another thing that I really liked about this camera is the little info screen right here. You know, this is a 2015 camera. You know, a lot of the mirrorless stuff that's come out in the last few years has implemented this, like the X1D, the GFX, the EOS R, you know, the XT3, a bunch of other cameras. This might have been the first. I'm gonna say it might have been the first. So I love the simplicity of this. I love the way this camera feels in this hand. This grip is massive. All 4 fingers fit on the grip just perfectly. I can say with this giant 24-90, this is a heavy lens. And I know that for me, that I would buy this body so that I could use M adapters and maybe even Canon adapters to run or to use M glass. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm gonna go out and buy a whole bunch of Leica glass because man, I don't think I have the budget for that. But I can put Voigtlander glass on here, which is very affordable and amazing stuff. I can put some Zeiss glass on here. I know that there's a new Zenit Helios 85 1.5 that's supposed to be incredible, and I think that that's only about $500. So there's a tremendous amount of lenses. In fact, I can even use my 51-2L Canon lens on here with an adapter, and because this electronic viewfinder is so insanely good with focus peaking, I should have no problem being able to nail my focus. And the thing is that you can focus and then you just hit the back button or whatever you assign and it'll zoom right in and show you that you nailed that focus. So you have that instant reference right in your fingertips. And like I said, this will require no lifting your hand off of it. You're basically just, you're at one with the camera. And I think that that is something that's so important about finding a camera system that works. You can look at all the pixel peeping, you can read all the specs, you can, you know, just go drive yourself completely batty trying to decide what is the best camera for you, but the way it feels in your hand, the way it performs, those are such important factors as far as A, your enjoyment, and B, your productivity. So I brought this out on a professional editorial magazine shoot. Literally, the morning after I'd gotten this camera. I had no experience. I literally took like a couple of frames with this camera and that was it. And I can tell you that this was an absolute joy to shoot with. In fact, I did not miss focus on any frame, and I took a few hundred frames for this shoot in a variety of different areas all over this facility. I took anything from individual portraits to group portraits to environmental shots to shots where I had like dragging the shutter with things moving and everything else being static. I mean, I took such an incredible variety of imagery and all of it came out what I think to be really, really successful. Like with my Canon and other cameras, I had the grid on so that I could, you know, because I find that to be a very helpful tool. And I even used the electronic viewfinder, which I also think can be really, really handy, especially when you're doing architectural stuff. This lens was completely distortion free. The colors were incredible. I mean, I don't know, it's just, there's something about the science, the color science that Leica applies to their cameras, even with the little Q over here, that gives the images a certain kind of a look and a feel that's fantastic. Dynamic range, I thought was pretty damn excellent. Now this camera has a native ISO of 50. That is awesome. To be able to go all the way to 50 ISO means that if you're shooting in a studio situation, and you can control your lighting, you can go all the way down to its native ISO of 50, and that you're gonna get the tightest grain structure, you're gonna get very, very little noise, if anything. Now, as far as how this stacks up, let's say, to a modern camera, well, you know, it doesn't have the ISO performance, but I think the ISO performance is very good. I do not need to be shooting at ISO 25,000. It's not something that I do. That's not important to me. I mean, if I looked at the metadata in my Lightroom and I looked at all the images that I've ever taken, I don't think we're gonna find even one image that's past 12,000 ISO or 10,000 ISO. And on those occasions, those were rare occasions, okay? I typically do not shoot, I'm not a high ISO shooter just by nature. I tend to wanna shoot a little bit more wide open, and as a result, I can keep my ISOs down. So, for the shoot that I did the other day, I was shooting inside a warehouse that had only artificial lighting, which was not beautiful lighting, and I wanted to preserve the look of the space that I was shooting in, so I exposed for the ambient, which gave me, with the aperture that I was using, it gave me an ISO of 800. That was my safe point in ISO. And I was a little bit concerned, you know, I haven't used this camera much. It's a 4-year-old camera. I was using strobes, so I was blending my artificial lighting with the ambient lighting. Well, I can tell you this, the images came out excellent as far as the quality. I mean, tack sharp, beautiful tones, the color was there, the color was just absolutely gorgeous, absolutely awesome. And even at ISO 800, which might not seem a lot by today's standards, it's still a lot, it's still a higher ISO to be pushing for things. The grain structure was really excellent. I mean, I am very pleased with the way that these photos look. Yeah, sure, maybe if I was shooting with a Sony A9, I would have gotten a better grain structure or maybe a tighter grain structure, but I'm not a fan of the way that the A9 files look. So for me, you know, this is all that I need. It's a 24 megapixel camera. If I need a 50 megapixel camera, I can rent one. If I need a 100 megapixel camera, I can rent one, and I do when those occasions arise. But for the majority of what I shoot, 24 megapixels is fine. My 1DX Mark II, that's fine. The Q, 24, this is 24. Now, we know that there's the Q2, and not this one, but the Q2 has replaced this one. If you can get your hands on one, that's a 47 megapixel sensor. Considering that these are on the same kind of production schedule, every 4 years there's a refresh, I'm pretty sure, or not me, but you know, everyone, that the Leica SL2 is probably on the horizon. That'll mean that it'll probably have something in the same lines as that 47 megapixel sensor. Well, are we gonna have the same kind of low light performance? I don't know. All of that has yet to be seen. Okay, so I spoke about a lot of the positive things, and to be honest with you, I really can't find much wrong with this camera. I absolutely love it. But let me just point out a couple of things that maybe I didn't love so much. The screen on here, the LCD, although it's a touch screen and you can do everything, you can control everything that you want to do just by touching, tapping focus, moving focus. If you're reviewing images, you can pinch and zoom, you can do all that kind of stuff. It's incredibly versatile. I find that the Electronic Viewfinder has better resolution and I preferred using it. That doesn't necessarily mean that this is a bad screen, I just think that the quality is better on the EVF. This is not a slide, this is not a tilting LCD. It doesn't swing out, it is fixed to the back of the camera. So if you are using this for video, which you absolutely can use this thing for video, that is going to potentially be a setback, potentially. One other thing I should mention is the battery is cool. It's integrated into the body, so it basically just becomes seamlessly part of the body. And you can see that, you know, it's flush mounted like that. The camera is really nicely weather sealed, but back to the battery life was not great. It's not terrible, but it was not great. I have found this to be true with a lot of mirrorless cameras. Like the X1D, battery life was really not very great, not great at all. Sony, I think, does a much better job with battery management, but we don't have to get into those details. But coming from using a 1DX Mark II Canon, which has insane battery life, the battery life on this thing is not that terrific. And I know that if I were to add one of these into my arsenal, I would want to have probably 2 to 4 batteries, no joke. I mean, literally, because you can't be on a professional shoot and run out of battery. I mean, that could easily be a problem. You got dual card slots, great, that's great. You can do, you know, rollover, redundancy, you know, you can have your RAWs in here, your JPEGs go here. You know, decent connectivity over here. There's no dedicated mic or headphone jack, but there is one of those ports where you can add the adapter that's the cable release with the microphone and headphone port. There's USB 3, which is terrific, and HDMI. No Capture One tethering, okay guys? Capture One does not play nice with Leica. Leica and Capture One are not friends. Yeah, I don't know, maybe because Leica's too small in the market. Who knows, maybe someday. But that could be a problem. There's certainly ways to work around it. You could set up a watched folder if you're tethering in Lightroom, and then have the photos be pulled into Capture from there. You know, most of the professional work that I do, all of my technicians are in Capture One. That's their native language. So, you know, trying to then get somebody to use Lightroom who's not a Capture person, I mean, trying to get somebody to use Lightroom who's predominantly a Capture person or Capture One certified and doesn't really use Lightroom, you know, it's not a deal breaker. It just means that there's going to have to be a workaround. You know, Fuji obviously finally joined the game and they got native support. Sony did, Nikon, Canon, Phase, obviously not Hasselblad, but there is no support for Capture One. Again, not a deal breaker, but it is kind of a pain in the butt. So, you know, I've loved using this camera for the few days that I have it because it's only been on loan. I would love to add one of these to my system. And like I said, I could easily see myself grabbing one of these incredible 24-90s because it's so versatile, it's so fast, it just does everything. You know, it's like the Swiss Army knife of lenses, and the image quality is gorgeous. But I also would see myself using adapted lenses on here from, you know, like I said, the Voigtlanders, and maybe if I could afford some Leica stuff as well. But I could definitely see going that route because I think that with this enormous viewfinder that you would have a much easier time focusing manual lenses and getting that exact focus nailed than using a rangefinder. I mean, look, I have nothing against Leica rangefinders, and the purists, you know, they're going to buy the M bodies, and I'd love to have an M body. But for me, with my workflow, I don't really know that I can justify if I had to buy one body or another. I think that this is probably the one that could do it all. So that's kind of like my mini review. I've loved having this camera. I think well, we'll stay tuned. We'll see what happens with this thing. But there it is, the best mirrorless camera that's ever been made so far, the Leica SL. That's it for now. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and we'll see you soon.